Hi everyone, I am Emily Cook, your instructor for Literature 220, and this is your first video tutorial covering the third unit, Rome, Empire, and Expansion. We are jumping forward about 300 years from the time that Aristotle was writing his philosophical treatises, and about 400 years after Euripides wrote his tragedies, and almost 750 years after Homer wrote his great epics that form the cornerstone of Western literature, and were also the cornerstone of Greek education. So the period in which we will be studying this unit is right around the turn of the millennium. A little history: Rome was gaining power as Greece was losing power. Greece had been taken over by the Macedonians. Philip II, who was and his son Alexander were both educated by Greeks and were students of Aristotle. Alexander established his center of power in Egypt, where he founded his library, which housed many of the Greek texts until it was destroyed. Meanwhile, Rome's military power was growing, and Macedonia became a Roman province in 148 BCE. So while the Greeks were talented soldiers, they were also dedicated to education and the arts. Athens and Sparta, the two great Greek city-states, represent the two arms of Greek culture. Sparta, the militaristic and tyrannical, so they were educating their young boys in the military arts, starting at about age 7. So when we would send our children to grammar school, the Spartans were sending their kids to military schools. Meanwhile, in Athens, it was the seat of learning and the arts and democracy. And at times these two city-states were allied when they were fighting against the Persians, but they were sometimes also adversaries when they were fighting each other in the Peloponnesian Wars. Both of these wars are described by the historians Herodotus and Thucydides, and these histories are still studied for military history courses today. For some time, Athens was a democracy, the very society ours is modeled after. Widespread education encouraged an interest in the arts and philosophy and natural sciences. Citizens were all educated, and also has influenced our free public education. Aristotle's collected works demonstrate the breadth of knowledge and learning that was happening in ancient Greece, as he discusses the arts and the poetics and the idea of mimesis, or the representation of reality, which is the creative urge in each and every one of us. And also he discusses ethics. He has natural sciences and astronomy, so very broad in the scope of his learning. Meanwhile, the festivals of Dionysus and were encouraging the dramatic arts of writers like Euripides and Sophocles, who you may know as the author of the Oedipus trilogy, Oedipus Rex and Oedipus at Colonus and Antigone. So these dramas, as well as our two great epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, feature heroes who were often part divine, such as Jason and Medea, and this quality, as well as the quality of being identified by epithets, which are a vocabulary word, which means the short phrases that describe characters in these long works with many characters. For example, Odysseus, the clever man, or the man of many sorrows, are examples of epithets, and the use of epithets being one of the qualities of the epic. In addition, the invocation of the muse, the heroic journey, which is again one of the topics for your quiz this week, and this story of military triumph and the establishment of a regime, all are echoed in Virgil's epic that we will read this week, and the mock epic by Ovid takes a slightly different tone and structure, as I will discuss momentarily. So fast forward a couple hundred years, Rome has grown as a republic, or a group of city-states that have banded together. But as the territory grew larger, the need for a strong central rule also became important. And so in the first century, we have Julius Caesar calling himself an emperor, being more like a dictator, but being assassinated by his friends, Mark Antony and Brutus. And we see Mark Antony and Augustus Caesar, or Octavian Augustus, as he was known at that time, who is Julius Caesar's adopted son, and Mark Lepidus taking over as a triumvirate. And once Octavian defeats Mark Antony and his wife Cleopatra in Egypt and knocks out Marcus Lepidus also, he establishes himself as the first emperor, and Rome shifts from a republic to a empire, as John Green discusses in the short crash course in world history video in a much more entertaining style than this lecture. But I encourage you to watch it. But these crash course world histories are not essential assignments, but I think you'll find them entertaining and informative as you learn about the context in which our literary works were composed. So Caesar Augustus, as he names himself, takes over. He contacted Virgil to write the Aeneid. Virgil had written some other poems, and he had studied law. He was from a wealthy family, and he was commissioned to write this epic to inspire nationalistic pride and to substantiate Augustus's right to rule as an emperor. So during this time, Rome experienced great peace and prosperity and expansion as the empire covered most of Europe and all the area around the Mediterranean, northern Africa, and in the Middle East. This period is also the turn of the millennium, which is noted by the birth of Christ. So it happens during the rule of Augustus Caesar and the lifetime of Virgil. So as Roman rule covered this area, it was greatly influenced by Greek culture, or Hellenistic culture as it was called, from the term that the Greeks called themselves. Hellas was a Greek word for Greece. So the Romans adopted the pantheistic religion of the Greeks, just renaming the gods, and borrowed a lot of Greek culture and style of education, but they added to it their skills as inventors and military rulers in statescraft and the military arts. Rome is well known for its long list of inventions, including the aqueduct, socks, a lot of games, and for spreading across the empire, providing roads and transportation to spread things like pickles across the empire. So it opened up the borders and communication between cultures through the empire. So while Virgil is writing a nationalistic epic to give Rome a story of its preordained destiny, Ovid began writing his mock epic about encounters between the gods and men, and between women and men. Both poems are written in Latin and in verse, and some have roots in oral folk legends, but both were conceived as written works, so they're a little bit different than Homer's epic, although they both are also written in hexameters, so that epic format. Or epic meter. So a hexameter actually has 12 syllables, and each is broken into 6 steps. So that's the hex is 6 and meters are feet. And dactylic hexameter is 1 heavy stress with 2 light stresses following it. So I will not be testing you over poetic meter, but it is important to recognize that language and understand what it describes. So Virgil's epic was never finished. He died of a fever after he had written 12 books. He meant to go back and revise them. And we don't know exactly how much more he had left to write, but we do know he wanted to burn it before he died because it hadn't been revised. It begins with the famous line, "I sing of arms and the man, arma virumque cano" in Latin. It describes the journey of Aeneas, a Trojan warrior who is escaping from the burning city of Troy as the Greeks are taking it over. He leaves with his aged father Anchises slung over his shoulder and his young son Ascanius at his side. He searches for his wife, but her ghost appears to him and tells him that she has died and he must go on to fulfill his destiny to found a great nation. Several other Trojans escape with him, so he has a small band of followers as they leave Troy and head towards the Italian peninsula. The image of Aeneas with his father over his shoulder and his son at his side has been reproduced in art throughout the years as a very touching image. The first 6 books of the Aeneid describes Aeneas' journey and he is getting help from Venus, but Juno, who is the Greek version of Hera, stands against him. Venus is the Greek version is the Roman version of Aphrodite. So he travels along, his father dies along the route, they have funeral games in his honor. He meets and falls in love with Dido, who is the queen of Carthage. She's a very powerful and wise woman and has led her city-state to become very wealthy and well-established. And at first, Aeneas thinks he is called to stay and help her lead the city. She proposes marriage to him and asks him to stay with her. But Mercury comes and tells him that the gods have a different nation in mind for him to found, and so Aeneas leaves Dido behind, and in her sorrow she commits suicide. Another great tragic love story that has been memorialized in music and drama throughout the ages. So Aeneas departs, and from this stage he heads to the underworld. Mercury tells him, or leads him to the underworld to have a meeting with his father Anchises, who is now a shade there, to receive advice about how to proceed. So he also meets many other heroes of legend and myth while he is there, and he is encouraged in his journey to head towards Italy. So this is a very prophetic moment during the text, and part of what establishes that divine providence that is guiding the establishment of Rome. And that's the excerpt that I have included for you guys to read for this week. So Virgil heads to Rome with his followers and his son. There he meets and falls in love with the Princess Lavinia, who is the daughter of Latinus, who is the king of Latium. She is already engaged to Turnus, who is the ruler of the Rutulians, and he is quite enraged at the rivalry of Aeneas, and the two challenge each other. Aeneas recruits King Evander and his son Pallas of Arcadia to assist in his battle. The Arcadians are the enemies of the Rutulians, and have long wanted to engage them in a challenge. Vulcan, who is the blacksmith husband of Venus, the god of volcanoes, creates a shield that is described in detail for Aeneas to defend himself in this battle. And the shield contains many scenes from Rome's history. So the shield is supposed to be a prophecy in the text, but of course Virgil is writing and describing the shield after these events have happened, but they help establish again that destiny that that Aeneas is supposed to fulfill. So the war breaks out, many battles ensue. Juno is helping the Rutulians, and Venus is helping the Arcadians, and Aeneas. Aeneas's friend Pallas is killed, which is similar to um, the death of Hector in the Iliad, and he was a friend of Achilles. Also, a female soldier, Camilla, comes to the aid of the Arcadians for a while, and she is like an Amazon, a great warrior woman who comes in battles. She also loses her life, but kills many of the Rutilians before she dies. As the book nears its end, Turnus and Aeneas are planning to meet in head-to-head battle. They have one skirmish. It ends in a draw. Aeneas gets injured, but of course he is motivated to continue fighting. Turnus gets injured. The looks like who's going to win goes back and forth. The advantage shifts back and forth many times throughout the battle. And finally, Aeneas gets Turnus down on the ground, and the epic ends with Turnus begging for mercy. And it seems as if at first Aeneas is going to give him, grant him mercy and let him live, but at the very moment before he lets Turnus free, Aeneas sees that Turnus is wearing the belt of Pallas, his friend, and in rage kills Turnus. So the epic ends with this dramatic finale, and the hero killing his enemy quite in a impassioned way. So critics often critique Aeneas as a leader. He is both dedicated to his destiny and his mission, but also somewhat heartless in his relationships with other people as he leaves behind Dido and sacrifices Turnus to his anger. The poem was quite popular at the time that Virgil finished it, and has been read continuously, and has been one of the essential texts of students of classical studies and students in general for a long time. Education was based on the 7 liberal arts: logic, grammar, dialectic, arithmetic, astronomy, math, and logic. And let's see, was that all of them? But studying the epic during that stage of studying rhetoric was important, and Virgil's Aeneid was one of the texts that our founders studied, and that our own democracy draws a lot of its founding principles from ancient Greece and also from the Roman Republic. Moving on, the themes that we find in this text, of course, are duty and patriotism, duty to nation, patriotism, duty to family, the idea of a manifest destiny, which again we see in America's history as the Americans settled the West and expanded the American empire. Aeneas has a fate that he must fulfill through conquest and with assistance of the gods. There are a lot of allegories and prophecies, such as Aeneas' shield throughout the book. And we see the influence of this text in many other texts. For instance, perhaps Beowulf, not sure if we can establish that or not, but again, another similar heroic epic, which we'll see in the next unit briefly. Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen, which is an epic about Queen Elizabeth in Renaissance England. Milton's Paradise Lost. Dante, who we'll also meet in the next unit, follows Virgil through the Inferno and up into purgatory. So he chooses Virgil to be his guide through the underworld. And Shakespeare alludes many times to Virgil's epic and to Virgil's other poems too, which were, he had a whole series of what's called eclogues, which were poems about farming life. So even though he wrote this very militaristic epic, he also loved agricultural life. Meanwhile, moving on to his contemporary, Ovid, we don't know if the two knew each other, but Ovid was also from a wealthy family, also studied law and rhetoric, was apparently a very witty and clever man and very popular. His other books include a treatise on love and a book that is a collection of love letters written from heroines to their lovers. So his theme of love and romance is seen throughout the Metamorphoses also. The Metamorphoses is often considered a mock epic. It is a collection of stories. There's not one main hero. There is an invocation to the muse, and the meter is similar, written in verse. But it's mostly just a collection of stories that Ovid gathered from mythology and legend. It includes the story of creation, which I excerpted for you to read, very short, and then also I include the story of Pyramus and Thisbe, which may be familiar to you from Shakespeare. Shakespeare retold this story a couple different times. It's told in a comic form at the end of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which we'll look at later in the term, and it's also the basis of the story of Romeo and Juliet. So Pyramus and Thisbe are two lovers who are forbidden by their parents to wed, and they meet at night at a wall and talk to each other through a chink in the wall and make plans to elope. They run away, and one comes home and